All right. Good evening, all. Welcome to the December 2025, not 2026, if you were reading the newsletter closely, uh, meeting of the Linnean Society of New York. My name is Peter Davenport, and I'll be serving as your acting president through March. So quick thanks to Norm Kraus. He texted, or rather wrote me about the Liederkranz address. Hopefully nobody's on the west side tonight. You have a long bitter walk across the bramble and bitterness toward me. In a few minutes, we'll look forward to hearing from Dr. Dustin Partridge, Director of Conservation and Science at the New York City Bird Alliance. But before that, we want to welcome new members. And if you're in the audience, please just stand or wave. Catherine Fair and Julia Manning, are you here? Well, if you're not, or if you're at home, welcome. I assume Catherine and Julie have paid their dues. Most of you have at this point, but if you haven't, please do. Your contributions, of course, support our technology on the back end, rental space, and a variety of the society's needs. Reminder, on this March 10th, the 148th annual meeting of the Society will be held here. Dr. Trevor Price of the University of Chicago will be awarded the 2026 Eisenman Medal. He's an expert in biodiversity in India primarily, and he'll be speaking on that. And he's the author of several books. It should be an amazing talk, just like all of our talks have been this year. Again, and one thing, keep in mind, if you have something to give for the silent auction, either a service, some of you are amazing birders, tour guides, please consider that, or something that you might want to donate, whether it's a piece of art or something that you've created. We would welcome those for the silent auction. And it's a special thanks to Will Papp, Kevin Sisko, and Ken Chaya for stocking the feeders. This is going to become an increasingly cold task. We really appreciate it. And so do the birds. And an annual plea will, I think our feeder fund is not totally depleted, but we will probably put out a plea in the next month just so that we can get donations and have that no worries for the coming fall and next winter. And now, please join me in welcoming Dr. Dustin Partridge, again, Director of Conservation and Science at the New York City Bird Alliance. He'll present a talk entitled Creating Bird Habitat Through Green Infrastructure and in Urban Areas. Dr. Partridge, or Dustin, will be speaking on the value of urban habitat patches, swales, green roofs, and more to the millions of birds that migrate through our city each year. He's a pioneering scientist in urban space research. He's helped shape the passage of local laws here in our city on green roofs and solar installations, as well as the national dialogue on the value of urban green space for wildlife and people. And so with that, Dustin, welcome.
All right, so hi everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for having me tonight. It is my pleasure to be here. I am excited to talk to you about the work that we are doing on green infrastructure, because cities are critically important for conservation. Talk a little bit about that and how thinking about green infrastructure, places like what you see here, which is a green roof in the middle of Manhattan that has a herringull nest on it, how sites like this are critical for our future, not just for New York City, but really for all cities. So I know that some of the best birders in the city are in this room right now or on Zoom. I want to give you a little bit of a challenge. Can you guess this green space? Think back to your birding this fall. And this happened on October 16th. In about an hour, there were 26 bird species. There were 5 of them were sparrows, 4 warblers, 2 kinglets. And some of the highlights include eastern phoebe, palm warbler, Cooper's hawk, blue jay, herringull, and a white-crowned sparrow. Can anybody guess which patch this was? Well, you guys got it pretty easily there, huh? Yes, this is the Javits Center. So this is a site. This is on a building in the middle of the city. This is, where this is. This is kind of right in the Midtown. This is a bustling, busy area. This is a convention center with people coming in and out of it. And yet on the roof, in one morning, there were 26 species up there and some decent ones, white-crowned sparrows. This is an apple orchard. This is an apple orchard that's been changed into a bit of a food forest with native plant understory, things growing. You see some grapes and hops and apples, and this just gets weighted down by birds. This is the type of site that I'm going to be talking about today and explaining kind of how this works and what we could do to encourage it further. I'm with New York City Bird Alliance. I'm the Director of Conservation with New York City Bird Alliance, and we always appreciate the partnership with Linnaean. And what we do, if you're not as familiar with New York City Bird Alliance, we work to protect wild birds and biodiversity throughout the city for all New Yorkers. And we do this through three main ways. Science, which is the work that I get to lead and have the pleasure of leading. We have a team of on-the-ground scientists doing research throughout the city on birds and biodiversity and the threats that they face. We have an incredibly engaged audience, just like you all. And that audience of thousands of people that are following our emails and paying attention to the work we do, we connect them with the science that's happening in the city, and we get them to advocate for change. And it's through this kind of amazing connection of science, engagement, and advocacy that we've resulted in New York City having some of the most comprehensive bird-safe building legislation in the nation. But today we're going to be talking about science. And now this group I'm excited to talk to because usually when I'm in a meeting talking about work like this, a lot of times people are like, well, what is conservation science in New York City, right? Like people don't get it. It's not something that is typically expected. But this is it. This is some of the work that we do. So in New York City, and I'll be happy to talk about any of these subjects, but today we're going to be focusing on one. New York City actually has the largest remaining waterbird colonies in the Northeast. Our wading birds that nest in the harbor, there's nothing else like it. It's like these oyster catchers. We have the majority of the oyster catcher population for New York State. We do a lot of work to reduce collisions with bird buildings, just like what you see here. And we do a ton of work to actually support green infrastructure. So create habitat and make the city more feasible, battle climate change. So these three areas are work that we're doing every day throughout the city. But today we're going to focus on green infrastructure. And this is really important because the world is becoming more urban. Oftentimes we think of conservation as that thing that's happening in some faraway place, but cities are really central to this. This actually just came out a couple of weeks ago from the UN. This is the projection of how cities are going to be growing, how that world population is going to be expanding. In the near future, the vast majority of people are going to be living in urban areas, cities or dense towns. More people are moving to cities. Cities are growing. That's going to continue to have a big impact on biodiversity. It means that people are going to be more disconnected from nature. We're going to be losing habitat to cities, and we need to really be thinking about what's going on in cities. And cities are critical for successful conservation. You see this, I mean, we're right here right now. And not only is it that there's incredible work happening here, and you can see it and go out and connect with birds as you all enjoy birding here, but cities are the hubs of media. The stories that happen here are stories that go across the world. It's the hub of business. The businesses that are interacting here with biodiversity in the city are making decisions that are going to be influencing the entire world and the entire everywhere that they have space. There are people here. The vast majority of people that are here or in other cities are going to be the people that represent and support conservation over time. So conservation in cities is critically important. It's not just all that. Cities tend to develop in biodiversity hotspots. This is New York City. This is a rendering from Dr. Eric Sanderson based on what was in New York City before European arrival. What you see here on the left is a habitat that was here in Manhattan. This area had rolling upland hills. We had deep forests. We had wetlands. There were people here. You can see the smoke coming up, but it was incredibly biodiverse. As birders, as people that are interested in biodiversity, you can imagine just how much incredible different types of wildlife you would see in this one area. But you can see what happened is the same things that draws in biodiversity, that critical biodiversity hotspot, are the same things that are good for people. We like biodiversity too because it makes it easier for us to thrive. That's why across the world, cities tend to develop in biodiversity hotspots because the resources that make biodiversity possible also allow humans to thrive in cities. And you end up with what we have now. But the biodiversity hasn't moved on. It hasn't forgotten about what's here. We still have patches throughout the city where there's incredible biodiversity that you can see. And this is really highlighted during migration. So New York City has up to 25 million birds moving through the city every year. This is research that's come out from one of my colleagues at New York City Bird Alliance. But this incredible number of birds that's migrating and passing through the city, some 350 species. This is a biodiversity hotspot. That means that despite that aerial view of just kind of concrete and roads, there's a lot of conservation work to be done. The work that we do in the city is going to have tremendous impact for those 25 million birds. But how do you do that? And that's what we're going to be diving into tonight. How do you increase wildlife habitat in a city like this? Buildings aren't going anywhere. We're just going to be getting more of them. So how do you go about increasing wildlife habitat, which is absolutely needed? And that's where we're going to start thinking about green infrastructure, the greening of habitats that, the reintroduction of habitats and greening of otherwise impervious surface. So I'm going to use this term a lot today, green infrastructure. What is green infrastructure? It's probably something you've heard before. The New York City DEP talks about it all the time in terms of stormwater capture. But I'm really referring to the area of basically transforming impervious surface, something like a rooftop or a road or something else that doesn't have any life in it, into something that has life, greening it with vegetation, creating what could be habitat if designed properly. So some of these are drawn out here. You have like vertical greening systems. These are green walls. You have green roofs. You have tree pits. You have traffic medians. You have urban gardens and farms, small parks. This is all green infrastructure. Of course, it's also restoring and improving existing large habitats and large forests. But in this context, I'm really going to be talking about the smaller ones. Because green infrastructure is not just about biodiversity. It's about us. And being in New York City, we talk about this all the time. What is good for biodiversity, what is good for birds is good for people. And that's absolutely the case with green infrastructure. In the city where our sewage runs off and goes through CSOs every time it rains, CSOs are benefit from green infrastructure because it slows down the rain. When it rains really hard, like it did a couple of weeks ago, that gets captured by the green infrastructure. The water slows down and doesn't rush off into our sewage system. We also have a city where people die from heat because it's too hot in this urban, in the urban context where the city and the impervious surface just absorb heat. And you can see the disparities here. The areas in red, this is the heat vulnerability index from the city. Areas in red are areas that have higher rates of people going to the hospital for heat-related illness. This can be alleviated through green infrastructure by installing that green space that breathes and sweats for the city and creates shade and benefits us all. There are a lot of benefits. It cleans the air, it drives ecotourism. All these other things that green infrastructure does are for us. But it can also be habitat. So for those of you, I'm sure you've all already noticed the warbler in that photo, hiding out on top of a green roof in Lower Manhattan. This is also habitat. If we think about it correctly, if we're not just thinking about green infrastructure as capturing stormwater, you'll also be seeing these wildlife coming in and using the city, using the green spaces. But how? How is it possible? And is it really wildlife conservation to do this? Because it's hard to find these spots, right? So there's a little pin right in the center here. That's a really big green roof. But look at the surrounding landscape. This is all roofs and concrete and roads. Is that something that's really useful for wildlife? Like, is wildlife actually finding their way there in this matrix of a really challenging space for wildlife to live? It's the question that we're really trying to get at with our research. Similarly, even if you have a lush green space, what about spots like this extensive roof, which is all sedum? It's just kind of a big non-native plant field, but is that biodiversity? Is that a spot that can support biodiversity and habitat for wildlife? What about a really tiny roof like this one in Queens that has all native plants that have gone in, all native grasses, but it's really tiny? At what scale is this actually useful for wildlife and what scale is it not? How do we support those that are most useful for them? So I want to start out with one that everybody's probably walked by in here, but really kind of highlights the example of how this works, how small of a space can be useful for wildlife. And this is actually brand new. I've never spoken about this publicly. This is the first time. Because this is just in. This is results from our data from this past year. And this is the study of Broadway malls. So the amazing folks at Broadway Malls Association have been thinking about the malls, the traffic medians that run down the center of Broadway. You've passed it a million times. They're thinking about that as habitat. So we wanted to help them understand, how is this site performing? What happens if you go out and you restore some of these small traffic medians in the middle of Broadway? What happens to biodiversity? Does biodiversity start responding and going there? You can see Todd Winston, who many of you may know here, conducting a survey. And these are the street medians that are talking about. This one up here is actually just being restored. We are surveying these sites up and along Broadway from the 60s up to the 160s. We're doing this using point counts and transects. So the field biologists tools to quantify, standardize how many birds are in an area. And we're conducting these surveys all in the malls. We created a trip report for our surveys here, which we're going to continue to update as we continue to do this work. And you can follow our results on a day-to-day basis. But we really wanted to set out to understand what's going on here. So the first question was, are the birds even using these malls or nearby using these malls? And we wanted to do this to not just document what's there, but also look at the nearby avenues. So look at Columbus and Amsterdam, because that's set up perfectly for an experiment, right? We have one avenue with a bunch of green space running down the center of it. And then on either side, we have some street trees, but not really that traffic median. So it really sets up a good experiment to see, okay, what's happening? How are these avenues that are right next to each other different? The second thing that we want to set out to do was document if native restoration of these small habitats can actually change biodiversity. So it's the wildlife change in response to a restoration with native plants. We all know through many of the work of those like Doug Ptolemy that native plants support more insects, which support more birds. So if we're putting in native plants in a small site like this, we should see more birds. We wanted to find out if that's actually the case. And the malls are bringing birds back to Broadway. So on the control sites, this is what we found. Again, we looked at these controls to kind of get a baseline for the neighborhood. We found 8 species. There's some good ones in there. Downy woodpecker, right? That's kind of a surprise on Amsterdam or Columbus. Everybody in this room would probably stop. But what happened on Broadway is incredible. And again, this is just from one summer and spring and fall of data. 39 species right along Broadway. Yeah, you see some great ones in here. So if you look through, I mean, it's an incredible list of things like black-polled warbler. That's a bird, a black-polled warbler, you're all are familiar with it. That's a bird that migrates from as far away as Alaska, stops in New York City to eat before it takes off for a 3-day flight over the Atlantic to South America. And it's feeding on Broadway because of the work that's happening in that small green infrastructure. That's incredible. That's a testament to what happens when you start thinking about green space, this green infrastructure differently. And to the question of restoration, I was very surprised by this, but right away, the restorations were happening while we were out there. And as soon as the site was restored, basically, we saw a response. So the sites that are in blue are restored. The sites in yellow are those that were transitioning or traditional, the non-restored, the older type of habitats that were non-native plants. But once you start putting in native plants, birds started showing up and foraging more and more. More species were there. They responded immediately to a site like this. This is a site that was being restored. So when you start thinking about green infrastructure just slightly differently, even those small patches in the middle of Broadway, wildlife responds. Kind of an incredible testimony to what happens in the city. This is brand new work. We're going to hopefully continue doing this into next year because this is something that really documents what happens when change occurs. But going beyond traffic medians, this is a view of the city. And again, most of what you see here is gray, right? You have obviously the large parks, Prospect Park, Central Park, Jamaica Bay, which are all incredible birding. And I don't think I have to convince anybody here of the value of those large parks. But how, again, do you start increasing green space throughout the city when there's really just a lot of buildings around? Well, that's one of the reasons that we want to look at this, a rooftop. This is a typical rooftop in the city. Really curious, and part of the work that I set up for my dissertation to figure out is to identify what happens when you turn a building like this, which is the Bronx County Courthouse, into this, which is the other side of the Bronx County Courthouse. How does wildlife respond to this? This is a green roof. And this is one of the areas of green infrastructure that New York City is really leading, especially when it comes to wildlife habitat. So green roofs are not just, well, I guess in the kind of the surface view, green roofs are a vegetated rooftop. It's what happens when you take a building and you put habitat, you put green space on top of it. But it's not really that simple because these are highly engineered green spaces. So it's not just putting down any soil and trying to plant plants in there. There are multiple layers. There's a waterproof membrane, there's insulation, there's a drainage layer, there's something that holds the substrate. And then it's also the substrate itself, the soil, is highly engineered to be lighter. Because one of the hardest things about putting green infrastructure on a building is that it's very heavy, especially when it rains, when it snows, you're putting trees up there. So even the soil is modified to be lightweight. And what you see here is another example of a different type of roof that's all it takes. It's just that few inches, 2.5 inches or so of growing media. And then you have that vegetation up there. And you can see it was rolled out quite literally like a mat onto that roof and left there. There are different types of green roofs when we're talking about green roofs. So generally, the design of a green roof is going to be driven by the structural capacity. That means how much weight a building can hold. And that's going to be mostly driven by the depth of the soil, the substrate depth. So an extensive shallow roof is going to be what you see over here on the left-hand side is lightweight. It's the lightest weight, lowest maintenance, and lowest cost. But you end up with something like this. That's what it looks like on the roof. It's a sedum. It's a non-native succulent. Usually that goes up there, but it really doesn't take much. You roll it out as a mat. It's pretty cheap, and you have to weed it maybe once a month over the summer once it's established. The other side of this, the far side of this, is an intensive roof, a deep substrate roof, which is what you have over here. Anything over 4 inches of soil, it's very heavy, it's expensive to install, and it needs a lot of maintenance like a regular maintained garden or green space. But these different factors are going to be influencing what sort of biodiversity can use it. And green roofs are really important. They have all the similar benefits as green infrastructure. They cool the air, they clean the air, they reduce noise, they get people out of hospitals faster if you have a view of a green roof. They reduce stormwater. They have all these incredible benefits, but they're not actually equally distributed throughout the city. Now, this is data from 2018 using satellite imagery to identify where green roofs are. And as of 2018, there are a fair number of green roofs, but it's less than 0.1% of the total number of buildings in the city have green roofs on them. Less than 0.1%. Now, that's kind of amazing in itself, but it also shows how much opportunity there is for growth and how different the city might be if we start putting more green roofs on more buildings. And you can see that most of the green roofs in New York City are clustered in Lower Manhattan and Midtown and the North Brooklyn. You can see what this actually looks like here in this kind of different rendering of Lower Manhattan. And again, these benefits are tremendous. So it's not just about the city itself, but also the building. You see how that HVAC unit that for the air conditioning is on the roof next to a green roof? The air over a green roof is cooler by many degrees than a blacktop roof. That means when you're trying to cool a building and you're using cooler air, your delta of temperature change is much less. You're saving money on your air conditioning in the summer by having a green roof. You're also insulating your roof. Oftentimes people are like, oh, well, you're not gonna, you have this layer. It's like basically like putting a jacket on your roof. This is insulating the roof, reducing how much heat gets out, how much you have to cool it in the summer, how much you have to heat it in the winter. And it's also really important for extending the roof membrane life. So on a typical roof, you have to replace it every 15 to 20 years or so. With a green roof, there are green roofs that have been around for 50 years without having to be touched because you're adding this layer that reduces solar input. So it really has a lot of benefits, not just for the city itself, but for the building. But is this wildlife habitat? So again, it's up many stories high. You can go up 70 stories and find a green roof. You might find one in the middle of Little Italy, like that other one that I showed earlier. Is this actually wildlife habitat? Can things go to this small space on a sky-high island and find value there? And that's one of the things that I wanted to set out to figure out early on looking at this. So this is a little bit of work from my dissertation, but this was trying to figure out basically, are green roofs valuable for wildlife habitat? And to answer that, you kind of got to know, is there even any food up there, right? So is there food for birds? That's the first question that I wanted to figure out. And then do birds follow them? So this is an example. This is some data from a study that happened across the city where, again, we had paired roofs. So a green roof right next door to a non-green roof. We're trying to figure out how they compare, get a baseline for the neighborhood about what happens when you actually install a green roof. And for bird food, everything that we did on one roof, we did to another. So that's that right there, that delicious looking bowl of insects, that is an insect trap. That's how we're getting this information. So we went out and surveyed these sites. And what we found right away was incredible. That the amount of food, the amount of insects that are out there, bird food, was tremendous, tremendously different for green roofs versus conventional roofs. You see there's a difference between spring and summer for both abundance and richness. But overall, when you start putting in these green roofs, you have insects show up almost immediately. That's bird food. And you're probably not going to be surprised, but the same thing happened with birds. These same figures were reflected almost exactly with birds. Buildings that had more insects on them had more birds going in and foraging on them. They were using it during migration and the breeding season. Birds are able to find the abundant food resources that are on green roofs. You see here a pair from one of the sites that actually Junko works in Lower Manhattan with a nesting mockingbird. So there are mockingbirds nesting on these roofs. And you can see birds up here foraging and then feeding their young with what's going on up there. You can also see during migration, these roofs get covered by birds, especially during migration. Migration is one of the best times on a green roof because insects are basically protein bars for birds that they're landing and foraging on these insects up there. And what was also really interesting in this study, what you're seeing here, pay attention, don't worry about the names here, but the green versus the gray. The green is green roofs and the gray are the non-green conventional roofs. So if in a neighborhood, you would expect that a non-green roof would be very similar to a nearby green roof, right? Just because it's in the same neighborhood, something on here would have similar biodiversity. But instead, what you see is across the city, green roofs are more similar to each other than their neighbors. It means that this biodiversity, these hotspots of biodiversity are getting birds all over them. And it's really changing what's happening in the neighborhood. And this is information that we're learning about constantly. This is all new. But currently, over 60% of New York City's passerine species use green roofs as stopover habitat. It's incredible. We didn't know when we set out to do this whether green roofs were actually even being used by birds. And now 60% of the passerine species are using green roofs. And there are some really shocking birds out here. There are things like eastern meadow larks that are on green roofs, right? Like that would be a bird that you would chase across the city, much less to a green roof in Lower Manhattan. It's shocking what's showing up here. Stopover habitat is one of the critical points. These birds are migrating huge distances and they need fuel when they get to New York City, drawn here either because of artificial light at night or because it's right along a historic migratory flyway. They need spots to rest and refuel. Green roofs are providing that. Now, during the breeding season, it's a little bit different. So we're not drawing in any kind of new birds that you wouldn't expect to see of what we're finding. So for breeding habitat, there's not really anything new and exciting that's going to be going here other than the typical birds you'd expect to see in the city. But the birds that do nest here are using green roofs as habitat for foraging. So things like common grackles, northern mockingbirds, American robins. These are all birds that we know nest on green roofs. We've documented nesting on green roofs. Also one that may or may not be surprised if you've been to the Javits Center is heron gulls. Heron gulls are one of the species that now nest on green roofs, as well as other large gull species in different cities across the world. But the largest remaining gull colony, heron gull colony in New York City, is actually on the Javits Center. No longer on the ground level anymore. Green roofs are incredibly important. And it's not just about the total numbers of birds that are there. Each of these birds is important. They're all telling their own story. They're all moving through, having this connection and being and finding their way. The majority of that 60% of the passerines that are using the green roofs, the majority of those birds are long distance migrants or insectivores, birds that are sensitive to loss of habitat, species of conservation concern. They're showing up and using these habitats. When we start building green roofs, whether it's for us or for stormwater or for building itself, if we do it correctly, we are very much benefiting the birds that are coming through the city and other wildlife. And I've mentioned other wildlife because it's not just about birds and insects. It's bats too. We have a lot of bats in this city. And actually, well, technically we have 5 species of bat that are in this city. And all 5 species of bat have been recorded on green roofs. So the most common one is this cutie right here, an eastern red bat. Those eastern red bats are all over basically every green roof we've recorded in the city. To record bats, we use ultrasonic recording units that we leave out at night. They kick on, record bat vocalizations, and then we can go back and identify what species were there and how often they were there foraging. And one of the cool things that we've done is we've shown that when a roof itself actually has a lot of food available, moths, bats love moths. When there are moths on the roofs, there are bats in the roofs. When moths show up on a green roof, it becomes a buffet for bats. They forage like mad over that green roof, grabbing as much food as they can. And it's mostly eastern red bats. So eastern red bats are the most common bat in the city, and they're also the most common red bat on green roofs throughout the city. We have eastern reds, big browns, hoary, tricolored, which is kind of amazing because it's going to be listed soon, and silver-haired bats are the 5 species of bat that use green roofs in the city. Now, there are a number of things that go into what make a green roof kind of good or not. And things to consider. So right away, you can kind of see the difference when you're looking at this. Not all green roofs are going to be equal. They might have similar habitats, but you can see one side is more of like an open field. This is a sedum field, and you can see heron gulls there. And the other side has a bunch of different habitat diversity. This is the roof that I showed initially in Little Italy, in that first image of a green roof in the city's matrix. You can see a lot of different plants here, including like a prickly pear cactus. And this design of a green roof is going to influence what biodiversity can use it. But it's not just about the design of the green roof. Things like size of the green roof are going to matter. So the species area relationship very much comes into play here, as well as the location, the surrounding matrix, like what else is nearby. These are things that absolutely decide what species can find their way and use a green roof. And landscape context matters. So this is another part from another study that we did, is looking at how smaller green roofs right next to big green roofs are big green spaces like this is Sunset Park in Brooklyn, how they perform. And what we found is that even putting in a small green space like this with native plants, if it's adjacent to a larger habitat, birds aren't necessarily going to leave the larger habitat that's better and go to a green roof. That was a little bit of a surprise. We thought they would kind of use that, go out and use it as an extension. But they're not leaving a higher quality habitat for a lesser quality habitat. But this same exact type of roof we designed and put out in other areas across the city where there were no nearby green spaces and they were covered by birds. It's showing that when you're in an area that has a lack of green space, these green roofs really serve as a refuge. So it's important to consider if you're thinking about a green roof, don't just think about your one building. Think about your neighbor's buildings. Do they have a green roof? What resources are there? How far are you from the park? What are the rare habitats that are nearby that you could help supplement? What resources are needed in that area? Landscape context absolutely matters. And of course, that also helps us learn that an important consideration is that green roofs cannot replace ground level habitat. They shouldn't. Green roofs should never be an excuse for bulldozing a habitat, putting up a building and putting a green roof on top of that. That's not what I'm saying. That is not what we want. They are a good way to introduce habitat into areas that it's already been lost. And they work incredibly well, especially when done right. This is a mockingbird American robin that was nesting on a green roof in Lower Manhattan. This is it singing for its territory. Similarly, like all green spaces, they need to be made bird safe. Over 1 billion birds a year die with collisions. And green roofs are no exception to that. If a green roof is installed with a big, beautiful window to view that green roof, that window is going to be killing the birds. So when you're designing a green roof, it has to be designed with like what you see here, which is bird safe glass. This is a bird safe glass windbreak that, because it was made visible to birds with those small dots on it, it became a habitat element. And now birds are regularly perching on it and foraging it on top of it rather than colliding with it. It is very important to make glass bird safe near any green infrastructure. So now I want to pivot to a kind of a case study in positive change. This is the Javits Center. Have anybody here been to the Javits Center? Okay, yeah, so you've all been there. Has anybody been there in like the last 3 years or so? Okay, a few of you. So this building has changed incredibly. So this is what it was around 2010. And if anybody remembers this time period, this building was hated. Not just because of the way it looked. It was called Darth Vader. I don't know if anybody ever referred to it as that in the room, but it was known as Darth Vader, and it had a bunch of problems, and it was actually slated for demolition. One of the biggest problems it had actually was that it was killing between 4,000 and 5,000 birds a year. This dark reflective glass was killing birds that were there. The employees that worked there, their day started by stepping over dead birds. The people that were going to the convention center had to get stepping over dead birds as they were going in, as opposed to, or if the Javits Center couldn't sweep them up fast enough. And this building was going to be demolished, but the other option was maybe do some major renovation, major change. So partnering with the Javits Center, we were able to help guide that change, guide that restoration that happened. And this was the new center, the Javits Center as of 2014. What you see on top is a nearly 7-acre green roof that went in, all along bird safe glass. All that dark reflective glass was replaced with glass that was visible to birds, has small ceramic frit dots in it and low reflectivity. So it stopped those collisions. Collisions were reduced by 90%. And it even went a little bit further. Instead of just not killing birds, which is great, they went a step further and installed a green roof, which provided habitat. And that first year we went out to survey, we didn't really know, honestly, what was going to happen if birds would use a green roof that was really large. So it had the size thing going for it, but it was sedum, so it didn't really have the habitat going for it. And in that first year, we discovered 15 species out there. And that was amazing because we had 15 species foraging on the roof that were previously just getting killed by the building. We've continued this work, and now over 20% of New York City's bird species are using this roof as habitat. You can see a phoebe here doing its phoebe thing, being a flycatcher. This is from a camera trap that we have on top of the bat recording microphone that we have out there. We're getting creative about ways to record what's up there. But this is a roof that gets covered by phoebes and kingbirds in fall migration, and they're up there foraging. This is a very different story for this building than one was previously here. And the benefits that came from this building doing this kind of the news stories that came out of New 15 Birds, the good feelings that people were having about this, it resulted in the Javits Center going even further. And instead of demolishing the building, they then went into expansion mode and they added in new habitat. They added in a new building. And when they built this new building, they designed it to have extra habitat that could support more birds and more green roofs and have that added weight. That's why there's now a farm up there. So it went from a bird killer to a bird sanctuary. There's a farm that's on the green roof that produces something like 15,000 pounds of produce. There's an apple orchard that we already talked about. All these sites are also bird habitat. And it's something that's become key to the Javits Center. You can see here one of the birds, common yellowthroat. This bird is always up there foraging. There's also, you can see a whole, it's kind of far off, but you can see a whole row of mourning doves that really enjoyed the sunflowers in the corner there. So this has been a full transformation for this building. And what's really nice is that it's not just about the building. The employees are able to enjoy this. Instead of stepping over dead birds, they get to join us and band herring gull chicks, right? Who doesn't like that? These little puffballs that are out there to catch them and track them. And again, this remains the largest remaining herring gull colony in the city. There's nothing else like this. And these birds that we're banding, they're showing up as far away as the Texas border to Panama City, Florida, to Toronto. The birds that are hatching on a green roof in New York City are becoming a source population for the entire East Coast. For some reason, this past year, a whole bunch of them started showing up in West Virginia. I don't know why, but it's just a fascinating thing that connects all of us through this green space. And we actually have birds that have hatched on this green roof. Just recently, we had these birds return. Birds that hatched on this green roof, we banded them just like this. They've now returned after disappearing for 4 years. They returned and started nesting on their own. It's an amazing full story, this story that's those birds that are coming back. And these birds might continue nesting up here for the next 20 to 25 years. They hatch in the green roof and they're going to come back and continue nesting for that long. It's an incredible story of success that's happened at this building that was once a major bird killer. And what I love to see is that bird safe glass is a featured design element. You go into the new building, if you've been in the new building, you probably didn't even realize that you were looking through bird safe glass. It's all bird safe glass. It all has the fruit built into it. And now instead of looking out at glass that is particularly dangerous, this is glass that has been made safe for wildlife, and you don't have to worry about birds colliding with it. I also particularly like this photo because you can see the city around it and then the green roof on top and just the contrast of what's possible with some change like this. Bird-friendly design is good for business. You can see this on the Javits website. They highlight their changes here. They're trying to draw in companies for conventions. People want to do good. When you're going somewhere for a convention, you can come to the Javits Green Roof where you have the Javits Center, where you have a green roof, you have a farm, you have bird-friendly glass, or you can go to the major competitor, which is McCormick Place in Chicago, which I'm sure you all probably heard about, which a little while ago had one day where 1,000 birds were killed in one day. So you can either go to the building that just killed 1,000 birds, or you can go to the one that's hosting 20% of the city's bird species. And this green roof is part of why McCormick Place went forward in their competition with the Javits Center and made their building bird safe after that change, after that incident. And investing in birds is an investment in marketing. So this story feels like it's a nice story. It really is a positive change, and the world can be a scary place. And stories like this are incredibly powerful because it shows us that change is possible. This is some of the recent press that we've gotten. So for example, this is a really great story from on PBS Wild Hope. I definitely recommend watching it. It's relatively short, but it's coverage that the Javits Center got. This is earned media. The Gotham is coverage that we're also recently in Smithsonian. So these stories have reach, it has impact. And going back to New York City and cities being central to conservation, this has reach. This inspires people outside of the city. It inspires other cities and can result in more change. And here, this story, as well as this Javits Center, as well as all the research that we've been doing, has led to systemic change. It's part of the reason that New York City has such incredible bird safe legislation. So we have Local Law 15. This local law, if you're not familiar with it, requires all new buildings to have the bottom 75 feet and 12 feet above a green roof made bird safe, installed with bird safe glass. That's permanent. That's not going away. That's the future of the city. Buildings that are being built will have bird safe glass in that. Part of this was possible because Javits Center and other partners came down and rallied alongside of us saying, this is something that works. It reduces collisions and it also benefits the buildings. It benefits the cities. We also have lights out legislation for city-owned and occupied buildings. The legislation that people often don't hear about, though, are some of the green roof legislation. So local laws 92 and 94 are really powerful laws that also require all new buildings to have a green roof or solar roof on them, one or the other. So the future of the city is one where we have bird safe glass and buildings with green roofs on top of them. There's also a really great incentive available, the Green Roof Tax Abatement. If you're considering a green roof, absolutely look into this. This is something we work pretty hard to make available. But depending on where you are in the city, if you're in a kind of a, most of the city, you get $10 per square foot back for your green roof as a real estate tax abatement. You get it $10 per square foot back. If you're in one of those areas that has the high rates of heat-related vulnerability, CSO issues, or lack of green space, you get $15 a square foot back. That covers most of the cost of installation of a green roof. This is an incredible incentive. This legislation is what's come out of the documentation of the benefits and the changes that have happened here. It's why New York City is leading the way. And it's why this is the future of cities. When I'm looking at green roofs, when I'm looking at the city, this is what I see. I envision a city where there's going to be, and we at New York City Bird Alliance envision a city where there's going to be green roofs throughout the city on top of the buildings. And that's a very different place for humans. It's going to be cooler. It's going to be nicer place to get out. It's also going to be incredibly different for biodiversity. You can just think of how different the city would be if it was covered in green roofs, bioswales, traffic medians that were improved for habitat, and being used by birds and biodiversity across the city. This is the future of cities that we're pushing for. With that, I want to just say a quick thanks to the crew at New York City Bird Alliance, all the scientists that are taking part in much of this work, including the field crew, including Junko, who's here right now, who helped survey at the very site that this photo was taken. I want to also shout out specifically Michelle Talish, who many of the really great bird photos, including this one, were taken by Michelle, who's also a Linnaean member. Of course, the different partners, Broadway Malls Association, the Javits Center, and many of the other partners we're working with. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you. Yeah, so the question, I'm just going to repeat questions for Zoom. The question was, what's the difference between a green roof and a reflective roof? So roofs that are painted with either a white surface or a reflective paint to reflect some of the solar input. The reflective roofs work incredibly well because they're not that blacktop that absorbs heat. But it turns out that green roofs actually work better. So not only are they reflecting kind of the vegetation or absorbing it and storing it as energy in the plants themselves, but the plants are essentially sweating for the building. Through evapotranspiration, through just being a plant and living, they're releasing that energy and cooling it off even more. There's also much larger layer of insulation that goes in there. So kind of the bare minimum is like the Javits Center, which is 2.5 inches, but even that's enough to reduce the amount of heat that gets down to the building surface overall, and much different when you start talking about 3 or 4 feet. So green roofs perform much better, and then of course all the myriad other benefits. Yeah. So that is green walls. Oh yes, thank you. So the question was, one of the other slides showed vertical greening. So vertical greening is really green walls. Green walls are essentially green roofs, but on the side of a building. And there are some really interesting examples of kind of natural green walls that can form, like if you've kind of gone along some of the historic walls where valleys form in some of the old stones north of here, where you see ferns growing out and mosses, that could be a version of it. But most green walls are planters that are individual components that have plants in them and are watered. It's a really great solution for places that are warmer than New York. New York has a hard time with them because basically this cold weather and the freeze-thaw cycle makes it impossible to water those plants in the winter, and it becomes a risk dropping down the building like that. I can't store the water. So basically, when you see a green wall in the city, oftentimes you have to assume 100% replacement of plants. They're beautiful, they're aesthetically pleasing, they have some benefits, they do support wildlife, but they're really a better solution in areas that are like Singapore has incredible green walls that are growing up them. Yeah. So the question was, how do we as people of the city take part in this action? How do we help make change? And that's absolutely right. So one of the things that you could do is really just advocate for change. This can happen in local. Advocate for change in your own building. So at your own building, go to your board, the building managers, and request a green roof or request bird safe glass. So make the changes, and we have plenty of data that we were happy to share to help you make that ask and make that and show basically the benefits of, hey, if we make this building bird safe, there's going to be a lot of benefits, not just for us, the residents and wildlife, but for the building itself. So that's the first thing you can do. But also join, we have avian advocates where we're constantly fighting for improvements in bird safety and green infrastructure. We have that on our website, and you can sign up, and we'll message you with an action that you can take immediately if we have, say, the governor about to sign a bill and she's wavering back and forth on, say, the Green Roof Tax Abatement. That's when we really need voices to raise up and call their legislators. And to kind of stay on top of what those asks are, you can sign up for avian advocates and take part that way. But also just raise your voice and kind of share how important bird safe glasses and how important green roofs and other green infrastructure can be, like the Broadway malls. Maybe next time if you're walking down as you're headed to Central Park, stop in Broadway malls for a little bit and take a look and see what you can see. I think you have a question, right? It's a great question. So I don't know if everybody knows got it, but how do we address things like the ground level sites, like the raised platforms along Park, right? You're talking about that have the subway, the trains running beneath them. That's actually what's happening at Broadway malls. So the Broadway malls are not leftover traffic medians, like where the road wasn't developed. They're actually raised beds above subway lines. And I mean, the folks at Broadway malls probably have really great advice on this, Broadway Malls Association, on how that came to be and how they came to form that. But local community boards reaching out to community action really makes a difference. And if the community comes together and says, this space that is currently just concrete should be green space for all these myriad reasons, I mean, maybe even a story would be up there foraging, right? That's the type of thing that can really make change. And we know through what we're seeing at Broadway malls that changing, if you were to change those sites along Park, it would have a tremendous impact. Yeah. So there was a question about the canopy on Broadway being what's partially driving the birds, and then the ground level and dirt attracting in rats. So for the first part of that, for the canopy does absolutely drive that as a major part of that. But the restorations that have been happening there aren't changing the trees. It's happening at the ground level and creating the forage. So not many of the malls have been updated yet. So far, I think 3 or 4 have been restored, with more on the way if they can find the support for it. But with that understory restoration, we did see immediate response. So it wasn't just birds in the canopy, it was birds coming to forage in the understory. So it does have a big difference. But of course, when you're installing impervious surface, there are going to be rats, especially in a time when we have rats kind of everywhere. And that's going to be a systemic change that really is going to address that, right? It's going to be having integrated pest management, different ways to reduce how many rats are in the city. And we really need to be cautious for things like rodenticide. Rodenticide is incredibly impactful. Most of the raptors that die in the city have some level of rodenticide in them. So it's a multi-tier approach that obviously maintaining a clean habitat, making sure that food doesn't build up in there, maintaining those habitats to make it less likely for rats to use is going to be part of it. Yeah. So that it's really going to take a citywide addressing of rats to ameliorate that problem. The one very odd case of rats, and one surprisingly that I never considered advocating, is there's a building that we know in Lower Manhattan that is killing a lot of birds because it's just pure glass. And we were shocked because the birds that were colliding into glass wouldn't last long on the city street. It's the case in general, but it was because they had a major rat infestation. So if you want to stop feeding your rats, make sure your buildings are bird safe, because you're not going to be adding food. So it's a really unlikely way to approach the rat problem. So one of the things that you could do to reduce rats is make sure your buildings are bird safe, because birds collide with unsafe glass, they fall down dead, and a dead bird is rat food. So if you're having a rat problem, consider making your windows bird safe, because you'll reduce the amount of food they have. Yeah. Yeah, it's a really interesting question. The question was, with climate change and the expectations of also the urban heat island changing the city to kind of like a subtropical habitat, how is that going to change green roofs? And it does definitely change the planning of what can be here, as well as what green roofs are probably going to be possible in the future. And it really goes down into when you're debating what sort of native plants, if you want to go with hyperlocal, if you want to go with things that are a little bit more resilient to the heat and the regime that's there. So it's definitely a consideration when you're designing the green roofs themselves. But that said, there's a building that that you can see that Google has installed in Lower Manhattan, St. John's Terminal, that is almost 3 acres of entirely native plants. And that building was designed based on what was different habitats that were in Manhattan before European arrival. And those plants are doing incredibly well. And that's a site that is really breaking our expectations for what's possible with birds coming into the city and using green roofs. Yeah. So the question was, or there was the observation of during COVID was the big year along Riverside. And possibly one of the reasons that there were so many warblers there was the reduction in traffic. And I think that's absolutely the case. And that's part of the reason why I think green roofs are so valuable, because the city is very noisy. We have people everywhere. We have dogs, which we are, we think of as adorable, but to a bird, a dog is a predator. And they're in green spaces and they're everywhere. Green roofs are kind of separated from that. They're these like really quiet habitat islands that are up sky high. And I do think that's a large benefit of this, especially if they're made bird safe or they have no windows around it, that it's a refuge that birds can go to and not be bothered and not have to get chased out when they're trying to rest during migration.
I always think it was visual. Like the cars are zooming by, they have a hard time looking at insects moving.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe, yeah, maybe they're when they see the cars going by, they're like their predator senses go off and they're not able to focus on foraging. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's one of the cases that green roofs and really restoring some of the existing patches that are around the city that are maybe in like a quiet corner of the city or a vacant lot are so valuable and are being used by so many birds as they're trying to make their way to larger green spaces like Central Park right nearby.
First, from Rick Ketch, are green roofs used to attract butterflies, especially those in seasonal movement? And are the roofs doused with toxic chemicals during Nile virus spraying?
So for the first part, absolutely with butterflies. I wanted to put some butterfly photos in here, but the butterflies that are in green roofs it's amazing. It's distracting when you're doing a bird survey. It's really cool to see. Especially when monarchs are migrating through. We have monarchs showing up on green roofs, especially when there's milkweed up there. There are loads of butterflies on green roofs, and many of the nicest green roofs that are showing up throughout the city are being planted with wildflower meadows, native plant meadows. Like Kingsland Wildflower at Broadway Stages has an entire space that's about the size of this room. That's all native plants, native flowers. And that building, even though it's in Greenpoint, right around Newtown Creek, and it has industry all around it, gets completely covered by butterflies as well as birds. Because they're attracted to the same resources. Yeah, so yeah, and honey too. Yeah, and just that. So, for example, the Javits Center. I didn't talk much about insects, but the Javits Center, in that even on the extensive roof, we've recorded 23 native bee species, including the Gotham sweat bee, which was a species of bee that was discovered in Manhattan. It's hanging out, living on the green roof up there. So there's all sorts of insect life on the green roofs. Yeah, and spraying for West Nile virus. So two-part answer here. I don't necessarily know if any like citywide overhead spraying is happening. Nobody's going up to green roofs to spray intentionally for West Nile virus, partially because a lot of what is needed on green roofs, which are highly maintained environments, is standing fetid water. And oftentimes that gets to be like in full exposure if it is out there on like a bucket that gets left out. So most of the green roofs in the city are really highly maintained, and that's not going to be an opportunity for like standing water to get up there, with the exception of maybe like a fountain that's not going to be standing. And with pesticides, generally, the people that are installing and maintaining green roofs across the city are really into doing it organically. So I don't know of any cases where people are going out and spraying mass pesticides because they're trying to maintain it. Even the Javits Center with a full farm up there is not using any pesticides.
An elevation effect on biodiversity. Are certain arthropods and or bird species which are only found at certain roof heights?
So it's a really, really good question. It's a really important one to answer. And because this is a relatively new field of study, we don't quite know the answer yet. There have been a few studies that looked at this for insects, and there is a difference where roofs that are up higher have lower colonization rate because it's just a distance to fly. And if you think about, so there was early thought that like really high roofs wouldn't be useful for biodiversity, but that's not necessarily the case.
Just echoing.
Sorry. But that's not necessarily the case because we have roofs that are up quite high and like on top of skyscrapers that you go out there and you're shocked to see all sorts of birds that are coming in, or you have this incredible sample of bees that are up there and they're finding their way up there. It might likely takes them longer to get up there and establish and colonize, but once they get to this habitat, they survive. And there are sites that are up, for example, like 12 stories or so, a little higher than 12 stories, that are really shocking times when you're out there doing a bird survey because they get covered by birds. Junko can attest to this, that you'll be out in this habitat where there's a patch of trees and all of a sudden there's like a mass fallout of birds into these trees because it's this thing that's up high at elevations, it's away from the cars, it's away from the noise, and birds are able to find their way there. So there's really a lot of kind of untapped potential and exploration that needs to be done.
Catherine says, thank you so much for this useful information. Is there a happy medium between the cheaper sedum roof and something that wouldn't be as expensive as the 4-inch version so that it can still support native wildlife to a greater degree? And what needs to be taken into consideration in terms of heat from neighboring glass and wind for plant survival?
Yeah, so this roof right here is not the best example. This is actually a semi-intensive row that's gone in here. You could see some plants that are popping up. That difference between this section, which is all sedum, and these flowering plants that were put up here in this row is a really good happy medium for like the extensive roof where very little weight is possible and little you want to do a little cost, and you can add a little bit of habitat element. This row of it's a lot of some like chives and other wild onions that are in there. That is a spot that almost every fall is just covered. Spring and fall has hummingbirds on it foraging. So if you do a slight addition to these things, if you think about what a bird might need in that area as it comes through, it can be a slight addition like that, just like adding another inch of soil in a small section that can make a big difference. And then the second part of that question was, yeah, so heat from neighboring glass. Wind is definitely a big thing. And this is mostly something that the Green Roof Maintenance Team, the kind of landscape team, is going to figure out when they're on site, because wind tunnels are very much a thing. Like at the Javits Center, if you go up there, you'll notice a few of the apple trees are stunted. It's because they're just getting beaten by wind over the Hudson during much of the year. There's also the constant challenge of this city as skyscrapers are going up. That changes the amount of light that gets to an area, either by shading it out or by adding a new reflection. And you kind of have to be agile and adjust into your plantings. So what you're planting one year, if a new building goes up, it might change what you can plant the next year. And it's just part of this dynamic landscape.
Thanks for a great talk, great information, and so inspiring coming from Seattle. Sandra says a big thanks for an excellent presentation and has a small ask that we consider changing our term from tree pit to tree bed to encourage better public stewardship, shifting perception from a neglected hole to a cared for garden space. She learned this from the NYC Parks Department.
I love that. I love it. Yeah, it's a tree bed makes way more sense. And they are absolutely habitat too. And should be thought about because they are quite often neglected and just stomped over and all sorts of negative things that happen to them. But they are tree beds, and I would even say that they are nurseries for wildlife. Yeah, so these green roofs that we're working on, so for example, Kingsland Wildflowers is out in Greenpoint, the Bronx County Courthouse. There's not as many green roofs throughout the rest of the city. And that's a problem that we're working to address. So that Green Roof Tax Abatement, when we wrote that abatement to get more green roofs, it was focused on getting more green roofs in the outer boroughs and areas that have higher rates of heat-related vulnerability, higher rates of CSO overflows, and lack of green space. So that was the whole thesis of writing that Green Roof Tax Abatement, because green roofs can be expensive to install. And we wanted to incentivize, basically make it almost free for installing a green roof in areas where they don't currently have it. Because right now it's very much currently focused on Lower Manhattan, like in that image, Lower Manhattan and Central Manhattan. But some of the work that we didn't talk about today too, that I definitely recommend following, is some of the restoration that's happening along the Bronx River. So the Bronx River has been going under a tremendous restoration with our partners of the Bronx River Alliance. And one of the things that I didn't bring in here because it's more of a waterbirds focus. But one of the things that we've been doing there is we conducted a study about 14 years ago by bike. One of our scientists rode his bike from the Yonkers line down to the East River along the Bronx River and conducted a bird survey along about 27 points. And in that over a decade since then, many of those points have been restored. And what's been incredible is that water birds immediately responded too. So those sites that were restored are now having more birds, more water birds, egrets and black-crowned night herons, and ibis coming in and foraging along the Bronx River and sites that have been restored. Some of these sites are wetlands restoration, some of them are a little bit more upland habitat, and that's a form of green infrastructure too. And no matter where you are, as you're making these changes, it's going to be making tremendous improvements. Yeah, so the question was, what does the ecosystem look like of installers that are out there? And there are a fair number of them. It's not the biggest industry in the city, but there's a fair number of them out there, and they really do range from being like super high-end major corporation development buildings to farms like Brooklyn Grange to really smaller organizations that are focusing on things like brownstones or warehouses, restoration warehouses in different areas. So there are different companies that are kind of filling that niche, to say, of what's available out there. Though there is certainly tremendous opportunity for growth because only 0.1% of the city has green roofs on it. Yeah, there's a question about bird safe glass on Governor's Island. So the new climate center that's going to go out there, I know that that's going to have bird safe glass. So the new buildings that are going to go out there are going to have bird safe glass, partially because of local law 15, but also they are really thinking about it in advance and trying to design it properly to have bird safe glass. I would say it's important to reach out to the trust of Governor's Island and those responsible for Governor's Island to raise the alarm about that. On our part, we used to have one of the houses out there, and we noticed that too, and we put up on our glass before any collisions, but as an example, basically a local museum of the different types of bird safe products that are available. The films, because when you're retrofitting glass, you're using a film, like a sticker matrix that goes on the outside surface of glass. And what we did is we put up a bunch of different examples of what that looks like, because there are a bunch of options available. But I would absolutely continue to raise the alarm on that and push for it, because it's Governor's Island, such an important spot. And a lot of birds go through there, and the existing glass is definitely a threat. Yeah, it's a really good question. The question was, is there any tax incentive for builders who are using bird safe glass? And the answer is not right now, but we're working on it. So we are working on it. Part of what we're doing is modeling off of the Green Roof Tax Abatement. We're trying to figure out a good incentive structure that will actually incentivize this. It's hard because then you start talking about city budgets and state budgets. So there's a little bit of hesitation about it, but keep an eye out, because soon we're going to have action alerts going out that are asking for change and incentivizing this, because you're right. I mean, I really do think that incentives are also needed to encourage this, specifically around retrofits, because local law 15 will be the future of buildings that are being built, and they're required to do it. But we have 1 million standing buildings in the city, and they need incentive to change beyond kind of us raising our voice and employees. It would be helpful to have some financial backing. Yeah. So a lot of these green roofs are private property. It's usually buildings that are doing it as part of for their employees, or if there's a school, for example, it's semi-public, or for residents. That said, New York City Parks actually is the organization with the most green roofs in the city, I would say. They have green roofs that have popped up everywhere, and oftentimes you don't even see them. They're kind of like nearby in a green space. You might just look up and see a glimpse of vegetation hanging over the side. That's accessible. Same with the Fibro building. That's one of the oldest green roofs in the city, the Fibro building out on Randall's Island. That's a site that's open. You can visit and tour. That's a really good example of green roof with multiple types of green roofs that are up there and maintained, including like a partial solar sedum roof, which is a good example. Otherwise, I would love to see more green roofs and more public thought about green space throughout the city, everywhere. So having everybody, anywhere that there is a space that people can walk through, not just having it as like an ornamental lawn or some non-native trees, but having things that can encourage biodiversity. That way everybody nearby can go out and enjoy that. Another site, for example, that you should check out are some of the parks around the Bronx River too, as was mentioned earlier. Those are some other sites that have been restored and are good examples, but oftentimes they don't raise above the noise and you can't quite hear about them.
Are there issues around making green roofs for older buildings or for newer construction, but not brand new? Can most buildings be adapted for this, or are there weight considerations that won't work?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think Zoom probably heard that one. The weight is the major question here for green roofs, because not all buildings in the city can hold the weight that's needed. Because it's the weight of the sedum and the plants and the soil, but it's also the snow and the water and the ice and all of that goes into it. But I would say that it's hard to know exactly how many buildings could hold it, but many of them could, which isn't the best answer, but it's something that we're trying to explore because of all the different structures that have gone in. The first part of exploring if a building can hold a green roof is a structural integrity test, where you basically go out and you look to see how much weight that building can hold. And sometimes you have a building that was really overbuilt and can hold a ton with trees and everything up there. And that's a great case. That's a great scenario. In other cases, it's something like the Javits Center or like a large warehouse where it has a really small window of how much weight can go in. And in those cases, only a sedum roof might be possible. That's why that Javits 7-acre roof is a sedum roof with 2 inches of growing media. It's because structurally that's all it could hold. And then in some cases, there are buildings that probably can't hold any additional weight. And in those cases, maybe a solar roof or solar array or painting it white might be a good solution. Yeah, so the question was, are there similar initiatives elsewhere? So from the incentivizing green roofs and green space angle, we're catching up as a city, but we're behind. Europe, and not surprisingly, is far ahead. So places like Stuttgart, Germany have had a green roof requirement in place for years. And if you go to Google Maps and you look over Stuttgart, the vast majority of the buildings there have green roofs on them. They realized the benefits long ago. We're just catching up. Similarly, there are other incentives that are coming in online in other cities about bioswales or tree beds or restored sites. So we're trying to put it together and trying to catch up a little bit here. In the States, us in DC and Seattle are probably taking the lead on a lot of this. DC has some really good green roofs and green roof legislation, as well as bird safe legislation. In terms of doing this sort of monitoring, there really aren't too many others out there that are doing the monitoring specifically of birds, of what's being used by birds. And that's why kind of New York's so groundbreaking in this, is because we are on a flyway or a hotspot for birds, and we're going out to do the work to see how birds are using this green infrastructure.
Nice to know you're not low.
Yes.
Sandra says, thanks for a great talk. Curious to know what technology is in use to study biodiversity in green roofs in New York City and in other cities.
Yeah, so across our sites, we are using, depending on the study, it's old-fashioned point constant transects, or we do a lot of this using acoustic recordings. So autonomous recording units or acoustic recording units are these little boxes that you can put out and program them to turn on at a certain time. This is what we use for bats and for birds. And then you can go back and record. That's actually what I used for my dissertation because I couldn't be on 20 roofs at once. We set those recording units out and it lets you know when a bird vocalizes. It's really powerful to know, to basically be at multiple places at once. There are trade-offs though, because not every bird vocalizes. So you're not getting all the birds that are out there, but it lets you get to know a good baseline. In other cases, depending on the work that we're doing, so for example, a project that we're doing looking at a green space in the Bronx and how birds might be responding to drone shows, we're using thermal imagery and radar to assess how birds might be responding to drones in that green space in the Bronx. And that's been really powerful. Those are both new technologies that are really shocking to kind of see how birds are reacting or not reacting actually to some drone shows. So there's a whole new world out there. One that we also use is cameras. So we use camera traps where we set out and there is a new AI technology on Wildlife Insights that can go through and you can feed it. We fed it almost 750,000 images and it goes through and documents the contents of every image for you. So these are new developments in AI and technology that were not possible just a few years ago.
So much, Dustin. This has been an extraordinary talk. It's not been full of information and your amazing research, but also honestly so many hopeful words about our planet and our cities that are great to carry with us in this moment. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.